Okay, so what if the history we're told in textbooks is just, well, completely wrong? Like, what if the earliest roots of human civilization, our global religions, and even our concepts of kingship were actually engineered as part of a literal planetary mining operation?
Right, it's a massive what if.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are setting out to untangle one of the internet's most intensely debated mysteries, which is the ancient astronaut theory and the Anunnaki. We're basing this whole exploration on a meticulously detailed Turkish YouTube video transcript. It's titled, "Who Were the Anunnaki? Celestial Beings and the Secret Beginning of Human History," from the channel Find the Truth.
And it really is a meticulous transcript.
It is, and our mission today is to, separate the wild, deep web conspiracies from the tangible, physical clay tablets of ancient Sumer. We want to look at how these thousands of years old stories might actually be the root code for modern human society.
Yeah, and it's a massive undertaking. I think it's crucial to establish a framework right off the bat for you, the listener, because whether you choose to view these ancient texts as literal, physical records of extraterrestrial encounters, or whether you view them as profound, complex mythological allegories, the undeniable fact remains exactly the same.
Right.
These ancient narratives have inextricably shaped human psychology and cultural evolution. Like, we are essentially living in the architectural aftermath of these stories.
The architectural aftermath. I love that framing, actually. But we all know the tropes, right? Like, anyone listening to this has probably seen the History Channel memes, the late-night documentaries, those sprawling Reddit threads about ancient aliens.
Oh, absolutely. The guy with the crazy hair.
Exactly. We're all familiar with that 1970s sci-fi lens that usually gets applied to this topic. So how do we strip that away? Like, where does that modern pop culture filter actually come from?
Well, to discard that filter, we really have to understand its origin. We have to look at the modern myth makers. You can basically trace this massive explosion of modern fascination back to 1968.
Okay.
That's when Erich von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, came out.
Yeah.
He essentially mainstreamed the ancient astronaut theory.
Which is the idea that they needed outside help, right?
Right. The premise that early humanity simply lacked the cognitive or, technological capacity to build anomalies like the Nazca lines in Peru or the Great Pyramids in Egypt without outside extraterrestrial intervention. He pointed to global similarities in stonemasonry and creation myths among completely independent civilizations and just said, look, there has to be a common off-world denominator.
Right. And von Daniken was the catalyst, but the narrative gets hyper-specific a few years later. In 1976, Zacharias Sitchin publishes The 12th Planet, and he's the one who takes this broad theory and staples the specific term Anunnaki to it.
Yes, exactly.
And this is where we have to pause for a second, because the transcript we're analyzing today is actually incredibly critical of how Sitchin's work is treated by the internet. It demands that we look at Sitchin's methodology, not just his conclusions.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Yeah.
Because the problem isn't that Sitchin didn't do the reading right. He spent years studying these ancient texts. He identified genuine, highly compelling cross-cultural connection.
But there's a but.
A huge one. The fatal flaw, the massive grievance highlighted in our exploration today, is what Sitchin did when he encountered gaps in those ancient records.
Right.
Instead of leaving the gaps as historical mysteries, like a responsible historian, he just filled them with unsupported fiction.
I mean, the transcript puts it hilariously. It says that because of Sitchin, people on the internet today talk about the Anunnaki like their cousins whose aunt was exiled to Mars.
It really is like that.
It is. You go on these message boards and people are literally mapping out commuter flight routes from this supposed hidden planet Nibiru to Earth as if they're looking at a Delta Airlines schedule.
Yeah, and the most enduring piece of this fan fiction is the motive. Sitchin popularized the idea that the Anunnaki came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, specifically to mine gold.
Right, the gold mine.
Yeah, to repair the failing atmosphere of their home planet.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, there is zero evidence for that atmospheric repair narrative in the actual Sumerian texts. None. It's a complete interpolation.
It's so wild. It's like taking a beautifully complex historical event, let's say the fall of Rome, and adding dragons to the story because it makes it more cinematic.
Right.
But eventually the story gets so popular that a generation later, people are fiercely debating the wingspan of the Roman dragons. It's just this archaeological game of telephone. But I have to push back a little here, or rather ask for your perspective on why this happens. Why is the modern mind so desperately eager to fill historical gaps with extraterrestrial sci-fi?
That is a brilliant question. And I would argue it's a direct symptom of our own information age. We live in a highly technological paradigm. We're surrounded by microchips, smartphones, heady machinery. Subconsciously, we struggle to accept that ancient, supposedly primitive people could achieve architectural and mathematical greatness without a technological cheat code.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. We project our own reliance on machinery backward onto them. If we can't build a massive megalith without a crane, we just assume they must have had some equivalent off-world anti-gravity device. It's a form of temporal arrogance.
Temporal arrogance. I like that term. We assume if they didn't have Wi-Fi, they couldn't possibly understand advanced geometry.
Yeah.
So to escape this internet noise, we need to completely abandon the 1970s sci-fi fan fiction.
Exactly. We have to go to the source.
Right. We need to travel back to the actual texts, to the sudden, almost suspicious spark of human civilization itself. Imagine we are traveling to Mesopotamia, roughly 4500 BC.
And this is where the historical record, entirely separate from any alien theory, becomes genuinely staggering. Around 4500 BC, the Sumerian civilization seemingly appears out of nowhere in the historical timeline.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, and it doesn't appear as a scattered collection of mud huts. It appears almost fully formed.
Yeah, it's not a slow, logical ramp-up of societal evolution. Suddenly, they introduce cuneiform writing, they introduce advanced astronomy, tracking planetary movements with terrifying precision.
Oh, the precision is unmatched for that era.
They developed the first human rights laws, the first hospital systems, the first doctors, libraries, and even the very concept of historians recording the past.
And that is the chronological anomaly that conventional historians continually grapple with. How does a society skip the awkward developmental phases and seem to just start from the middle of the book? It's this explosion of sudden, highly structured order. And it's within their foundational texts like the Trahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Enuma Elish that we actually meet the Anunnaki.
Okay, let's ground the listener here for a second. When we say Enuma Elish, we aren't talking about some mystical glowing scroll. We're talking about the Babylonian creation myth recorded on 7 distinct physical clay tablets.
Right, discovered in the ruined library of Ashurbanipal.
Yes, and in these texts, the Anunnaki are explicitly defined. The literal translation of the word, as noted in the transcript, is the heavenly king lineage coming from Anunnaki,
which refers to the sky and the earth, and a sky key is earth. And the texts present a narrative that is entirely different from the gold mining atmospheric repairman of modern internet lore. The Enuma Elish actually speaks of a massive war of the gods that took place before the earth was even fully formed.
The cosmic war.
Exactly. The Anunnaki are depicted as being tasked with establishing order on earth following these massive cosmic collisions.
Okay, wait, I need to stop you there, because here is where the paradigm totally shifts. When you actually read the translations of these clay tablets, these beings aren't described as ethereal, magical, invisible spirits in the way we think of deities today.
No, they're not.
They are described as physical, flesh, and blood. How does that work? If they were just advanced flesh and blood beings, how did they maintain the illusion of godhood? I mean, wouldn't an early human realize they bleed just like us?
That right there is the crux of the misunderstanding. We have been conditioned by thousands of years of modern theology to view gods as spiritual, invisible, omnipotent forces that exist outside of physical reality.
Right.
But the Sumerians didn't write about invisible spirits. They wrote about highly advanced physical beings who were larger than humans, who possessed technology that appeared like magic, and who had very real physical needs. They didn't have to trick humans into thinking they were invisible spirits.
Yeah, they didn't need to hide.
Exactly. They just had to demonstrate absolute, overwhelming physical and technological supremacy.
And the physical needs are explicitly detailed. The texts say they required food, and not like symbolic offerings of smoke, but literal red meat, beautiful vegetables, fruit, beer, and wine.
Yeah, exactly. An omnipotent, omnipresent creator of the universe does not need a pint of beer and a roasted sheep. Furthermore, they needed shelter. Those massive stepped pyramid structures across Mesopotamia that we call ziggurats. The texts strongly indicate those weren't originally built as symbolic temples for communal prayer.
Right.
They were built as literal, heavily guarded estates for physical landlords to reside in, completely protected from the elements and from the general population.
Okay, let's unpack the logic of that. If you have a group of highly advanced flesh and blood beings who require physical sustenance, they need a state built, they need massive agricultural canals dug to water the crop, they need food harvested and cooked, you have an immediate massive logistical problem.
A huge workforce problem.
Right. If there are only a few hundred or a few thousand of them, who's going to do all the backbreaking labor? Which brings us to an incredible discovery from the 19th century, detailing what might be the first recorded labor strike in planetary history.
Yeah, to truly appreciate this, you have to picture the scene in the mid to late 1800s. Archaeologists like Sir Henry Layard and Hormuzd Rassam were excavating the desolate regions of ancient Mesopotamia, places like Nippur and
Digging through the dirt.
literally digging through meters of packed dirt and sand. And beneath it all, they didn't just find a few artifacts. They found libraries, thousands upon thousands of cuneiform clay tablets.
And translating cuneiform isn't like translating French, right? It's a dead, impossibly complex, wedge-shaped script.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult.
But when linguists finally began to decipher specific texts like the Enki and Ninmah myth, they uncovered a story that totally shatters the conventional, comforting narrative of human creation. Because before humans even entered the picture, the Anunnaki had a subservient divine race working for them.
Yes. The texts introduce a subgroup called the Igigi. The exact etymology of that word is debated, but their role is very clear. The Igigi were the ones doing the heavy lifting. They were the grunts.
The grunts, wow.
Yeah, they were building the infrastructure, digging the massive water canals, which, were essential for agriculture in the Mesopotamian basin, and they were working in the mines.
But eventually the labor becomes too much. The texts describe the Igigi as being utterly exhausted. They are burning their tools, they rebel against the ruling Anunnaki, they go on strike.
And suddenly, this advanced society is faced with a catastrophic labor crisis. The infrastructure grinds to a halt, the canals aren't being dredged.
The ruling council must have been in an absolute panic.
They were. So Enki, who is a central figure often characterized as the god of water, wisdom, and importantly, creativity and engineering, he decides to formulate a solution. He partners with the goddess Ninmah, who acts as a sort of chief medical officer.
Okay.
And they essentially initiate a biological engineering project to create a replacement worker.
A biological engineering project. The texts describe them treating this as a literal laboratory experiment. They mix what is translated as clay, which implies an earthbound element, something native to the planet, maybe an early hominid or primate, with the blood or essence of the gods themselves. They are splicing local genetics with their own.
And it is not a magical, instantaneous success. If this were a purely mythical, omnipotent creation story, God speaks and man appears perfectly formed, right?
They'll let there be light moment.
Exactly. But the Sumerian texts describe failure after failure. They detail attempts where the resulting creature has non-functioning limbs or organs that don't work or lacks the capacity for speech. It reads like a trial and error scientific log.
Finally, though, they succeed. They engineer what they call a Dappa, the first functional human male, but the transcript highlights a deeply unsettling reality here. According to the absolute oldest written texts we possess, humanity was not created as the beautiful, sacred pinnacle of the universe.
Far from.
We were engineered specifically to be a subservient worker caste, take over the grueling mining and agricultural labor that the Igigi refuse to do.
It is a profound psychological pivot from what most modern people believe. The Abrahamic religions generally teach that humanity is the supreme, honorable creation, sculpted with love and given dominion over the earth. The Sumerian blueprint says, no, you are created to swing a pickaxe. You are a biological tool.
And what exactly were they swinging the pickaxe for?
The texts indicate gold was a primary target, and the Anunnaki's obsession with gold didn't just stay in Sumer, it trickled down and infected all of subsequent human history.
Oh, the enduring psychological impact of that specific metallic obsession is remarkable. It spans disconnected continents and millennia. Think about the Egyptian pharaoh, entirely covering their bodies in sarcophagi in gold to visually separate themselves from commoners and appear divine.
Right.
Think about the Greek pantheon dwelling in golden palaces on Mount Olympus. Think about ancient Hindu legends explicitly calling gold the metal of the gods and plating their sacred temples in it. The Incas called gold the sweat of the sun.
Across the globe, gold became the immutable physical symbol of divine power, mirroring the initial imperative of the Mesopotamian god.
It's staggering how that specific obsession endured, but I want to put you, the listener, into this thought experiment for a second. Imagine you are a Dappa. You are this newly engineered human being. You're sentient, you're intelligent. Why do you view these beings as gods worthy of worship rather than just really advanced scientists or oppressive landlords?
It's a fair question.
Right. The transcript uses an absolutely brilliant analogy to explain the mechanic of this, looking at modern anthropology and the cargo cults of World War II.
Yeah, the cargo cult phenomenon is perhaps the most perfect illustrative example we have of how religion can instantly spark from a technological disparity. During the Pacific theater of the Second World War, the American and Allied militaries needed to establish forward operating bases. So they landed on remote islands in places like Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu.
Right, and there were indigenous tribes living in the dense jungles of these islands, like the Asmat people, who had existed in complete isolation.
Complete isolation.
They had never seen industrialized society, let alone a C-47 transport plane. Suddenly, the sky roars, and these massive, gleaming metal birds descend from the clouds. They clear the jungle, build airstrips, and these planes start dropping magical boxes via parachute boxes filled with incredibly dense calories, medicine, flashlight, and tents.
And to the indigenous tribes observing this from the tree line, these planes and the men operating them were undeniably divine. It was the only logical framework their worldview could apply to the situation. But what happened after the war ended is the crucial part.
Oh, absolutely.
The military packed up, the bases were abandoned, and the metal birds stopped coming.
The cargo stopped dropping. So what do the tribes do? They start trying to recreate the conditions that brought the gods in the first place. They build exact life-size replicas of American cargo planes entirely out of bamboo and vines.
It's incredible.
They carve wooden headphones for themselves and sit in bamboo air traffic control towers. They build mock landing strips and light signal fires.
They created a localized religion based entirely on mimicking the behavior of advanced beings they didn't understand. They believed that if they performed the right rituals, the gods in the sky would return and bless them with cargo again.
Exactly.
Now, map that exact psychological reaction onto early humanity. If giant, technologically supreme beings dropped from the sky, possessed destructive power you couldn't comprehend, and literally engineered your species in a lab, wouldn't you naturally view them as divine?
Absolutely. I mean, the transcript notes that the more ignorant a person or a culture is about the mechanics of the natural world, the more they attribute divine, supernatural meanings to events they cannot explain. We invent worship, we create elaborate festivals, we institute absolute obedience, and eventually the truth of the initial technological encounter is completely lost, buried under layers of ritual and dogma.
And initially, this relationship worked for the Anunnaki. They had their labor force. Early humans worshipped their creators, harvested their food, built and maintained their ziggurat, and worked the mines. But as any urban planner or sociologist will tell you, a workforce that continually multiplies eventually reaches a critical mass where it becomes impossible to control.
And humanity was definitely multiplying. The texts tell us that the human population exploded across the region, and with that population boom came noise, chaos, and a breakdown of the strict subservience the Anunnaki demanded.
Yeah, the texts often use the word noise to describe the human population, which many scholars interpret as a metaphor for societal chaos and rebellion. Humans began to develop their own complex society. They began to grow an ego. They started seeing themselves not as mere tools, but as possessing their own divine quality. They forgot their place.
Enter Enlil. Now, Enlil is essentially the chief executive, the strict authoritarian ruler figure among the Anunnaki Council, and he is absolutely enraged by this insubordination. He views humanity the way a homeowner views like a termite infestation.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. He decides that this entire biological experiment, initiated by Enki, has gotten completely out of hand, and his proposed solution is terrifyingly absolute.
Enlil decides to hit the reset button. He decrees that the entire human species is to be wiped out by a catastrophic, localized flood, a massive deluge that will cleanse the region of this noisy, disrespectful experiment. And crucially, he orders the Anunnaki Council to swear an oath that no human is to be warned of the impending disaster.
But Enki, the scientist who actually designed the human genome, is deeply conflicted. He feels a paternal attachment to his creation. He doesn't want to see his crowning achievement utterly exterminated. So Enki looks for a loophole to subvert Enlil's executive order without technically breaking his oath.
He finds a clever workaround.
He does. He decides to sneak a warning to a specific human king that he favors.
In the Atrahasis epic, this human is named Ziusudra. In the epic of Gilgamesh, he is famously known as Utnapishtim. The texts provide an incredibly vivid, specific detail of how Enki delivers this warning. To avoid the accusation of speaking directly to a human, Enki goes to Utnapishtim's dwelling and speaks through the reed wall of his tent.
Wow.
He essentially whispers to the wall, knowing Utnapishtim is listening on the other side.
Imagine being Utnapishtim. You're sitting in your tent and a voice from the wall tells you the world is about to end. And the instructions are incredibly precise. Enki tells him to dismantle his house, abandon his possessions, and build a massive multi-level ship. He is given exactly 7 days to complete this impossible task. He's told to load his family, skilled artisans, and the seed of living things, various animals, onto this vessel.
Then the deluge begins. A flood of unimaginable scale, likely triggered by severe climatic shifts or a regional disaster amplified by Anunnaki technology. It just swallows the known world. The texts describe the storm raging for 6 days and 6 nights, drowning the plains of Mesopotamia.
And when the waters finally begin to recede, the massive ship runs aground on the peak of a mountain. Utnapishtim waits inside, terrified. To check if there is any dry land emerging from the floodwaters, he starts releasing birds. First a dove, then a swallow. Both return because they can't find a place to rest. Finally, he releases a raven, and the raven doesn't.
That is the signal. They disembark onto the desolate, mud-covered peak. And what is the very first action that Utnapishtim takes? He immediately sets up 7 cauldrons, sacrifices an animal, and cooks meat. He understands the mechanics of his creators.
The texts explicitly note that the gods, who had fled to the higher heavens during the storm and had been completely starved of their agricultural offerings, smell the roosting meat. They gather around the sacrifice like flies.
Like flies to a barbecue.
Exactly. Enlil arrives, sees the ship, and is initially furious that some humans survived his purge. But Enki steps in, calms him down, and argues for a new, more balanced approach to managing the surviving human population. The era of direct, heavy-handed subjugation begins to shift.
According to the analysis in the transcript, this era of direct physical interaction likely ended with an event that echoes down to us as the Tower of Babel incident. It represents a final fracturing, a scattering of human populations and languages, and the gods seemingly stepping back from direct, visible rulership, leaving human proxies in their place.
But trying to find a clear, near unbroken physical chronology of these events today is incredibly difficult, and this is where the transcript makes a very pointed observation about modern geopolitics. We are missing massive pieces of the puzzle, not just because time degrades clay, but because of active modern destruction.
Yeah, the historical record has been repeatedly fractured by modern conflict. The transcript highlights how imperial interventions, specifically tracing back to foreign involvement in U.S. military actions in Iraq, and the subsequent devastating rise of ISIS, have resulted in the catastrophic loss of ancient sites.
It's devastating.
It is. Museums in Baghdad were looted. Countless ancient cuneiform tablets, potentially holding missing chapters of this narrative, were destroyed in bombings or smuggled out of the country into the private, temperature-controlled vaults of wealthy collectors.
It really makes you wonder, are we operating on an incomplete timeline of our own species because the ultimate physical evidence is locked away in a private vault in London or Geneva, or worse, turned to ash in a bombing raid? It is a profound tragedy of human memory.
It really is. But what the transcript argues is that while the physical clay tablets might be hidden or shattered, the psychological echoes of these events, the trauma of the deluge, the awe of the creators, absolutely survived. They didn't just survive, they mutated.
They became the foundational architecture of the world's major religions. Now, I need to take a brief pause here. Before we dive into this next section, I want to explicitly remind you, the listener, that we are now exploring the comparative religious analysis presented in the source material.
Yes, that's important to clarify.
Right. This deep dive is not taking a theological stance or endorsing a specific religious viewpoint. We are impartially mapping the textual historical similarities exactly as they are laid out in the transcript, treating them as an academic exercise in cultural transmission.
And as an academic exercise, it is fascinating. We are looking at text A and comparing it to text B, C, and D. When you do that, the source traces astonishing, undeniable structural and narrative parallels across global cultures that were geographically isolated from one another.
Right.
We can start by looking at the concept of the divine hierarchy. In ancient Sumer, you have a supreme trinity at the top, Anu the father, Enlil the strict executive, and Enki the scientist. These three sit atop a larger ruling council of exactly 12 Anunnaki gods.
And that specific numerical and hierarchical structure just copy-pastes itself across the globe. How does that happen? In Egyptian mythology, you have a primary god, Amun, accompanied by Osiris and Set. Move over to ancient Greece. It's the trinity of Kronos, Zeus, and Poseidon ruling over the 12 Olympians.
It's everywhere.
Move to India in Hinduism, you have the supreme Trimurti of Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Even across the Atlantic, completely isolated in the Americas, the Maya had Hunabku as the supreme creator, with Itzamna and Kukulkan below him.
It's the mechanics of cultural syncretism. As trade routes open, as empires conquer one another, the conquering culture absorbs the gods of the conquered, overlaying their own names but keeping the foundational blueprint. The structural repetition is staggering. You see the Council of 12 everywhere. The 12 Olympians, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles. But the narrative repetition is even more specific, particularly when we look at how the Mesopotamian flood myth transitioned into the Abrahamic texts.
If you open the Torah, specifically the book of Genesis, the events leading up to the flood mirror the Sumerian tablets almost beat for beat. The Torah talks about divine beings referred to as the Elohim, or the sons of God, coming down and mating with human women. This crossbreeding creates a race of mighty giants known as the Nephilim. This unauthorized hybridization, along with human corruption and violence, angers God.
God regrets creating humanity, decides to wipe the slate clean with a massive flood, but chooses to warn one righteous man, Noah. Noah receives specific architectural instructions to build an ark, coat it in pitch, and load his family and a genetic repository of animals. The flood comes. In Genesis, the rain lasts for 40 days instead of the Sumerian 6, but the mechanics are identical. The ark eventually runs aground and rests on the peaks of the mountains of Ararat. Noah waits, then releases a raven and a dove to check for dry land. And when they finally disembark, what is the very first action Noah takes? He builds an altar and offers a burnt sacrifice of animals. And the text of Genesis 8.21 explicitly notes that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and promised in his heart never to curse the ground again. It is structurally identical to Utnapishtim, appeasing the starved Anunnaki with the smell of roasting meat. The core motifs are preserved flawlessly.
The transcript also notes that the Quran features the story of Noah as a messenger, warning his people of their corruption, building an ark under divine supervision to escape a catastrophic flood that swallows the non-believers. While the Quran simplifies the narrative and removes a lot of the older polytheistic symbolic details, the core architectural blueprint of the story remains. A frustrated divine authority hitting the reset button on a disobedient human population, saving only a select remnant.
And if we trace it all the way back to the very beginning, the creation of the world itself, the parallels continue to align. The ancient Sumerian tablets lay out a very specific 6-step sequence of creation.
6 steps, okay?
First, order emerges from a chaotic, universal, watery abyss. Second, the divine entities are created. Third, the firmament of the sky and the earth are separated. Fourth, the geographical features of the world are shaped. Fifth, the plants and animals are made. And sixth, humans are created.
That perfectly maps to the 6 days of creation in the Abrahamic texts. The Torah talks about the Spirit of God moving over the face of the chaotic deep waters. God creates a firmament, a dome, to separate the waters above from the waters below. God forms man from the dust of the ground, just like the Sumerian clay, and breathes life into him. The sequence is identical, step by step.
What's incredibly fascinating here is to look at the etymology, to track how the actual names of these divine beings drifted and evolved as human language evolved over millennia.
Oh, I love this part.
Phonetic shifts happen naturally as words move across different linguistic groups. The expert in the transcript traces the name of the Sumerian chief god, Anu. As the Akkadian Empire rose and absorbed Sumerian culture, this name shifted phonetically to Enuma. As trade and conquest moved the concept into Egyptian culture, it became Amun or Amon.
And the transcript claims that this name, Amun, became so deeply ingrained in regional religious rituals that it ended up being used as an affirmation at the end of prayers. It evolved into Amen in Judaism and Christianity, and Amen in Islam. We are literally still invoking the phonetic ghost of the Sumerian sky god when we close a prayer today.
That is exactly what the transcript suggests. Similarly, it breaks down the Hebrew word Elohim, which is frequently used for God in the Torah. El, or Elohim, is actually a plural word, literally translates to the powerful ones or the shining one. The singular form is Eloha.
Okay, so it starts plural.
Right, and as languages in the Levantine region evolved over centuries, this term shifted. In Aramaic and Syriac, the languages spoken during the time of Jesus, it became Eloha or Eloha, and as it moved into the Arabic peninsula, it became Ilaha, which is the linguistic root of Allah.
It's an unbroken chain of phonetic evolution. The transcript even points out that the pre-Islamic idols worshipped at the Kaaba in Mecca, specifically the goddesses Alat, Aluza, and Manat, can structurally and historically be traced all the way back to the various aspects of the Anunnaki goddess Inanna. The lineage of worship is completely unbroken. It just gets new branding and new theological overlays every few centuries.
And crucially, the nature of that worship evolved in a very specific logical way. As we discussed earlier, in the early days of Sumer, worship was incredibly literal.
Right, literal groceries.
Exactly. It was agricultural. It was delivering physical groceries, meat and beer to physical landlords living in physical estates, the ziggurats. But once those physical beings departed, or stepped back, or faded into myth, the physical rituals remained, but their purpose morphed.
It became symbolic. You still slaughter the sheep, but because the god is no longer sitting in the room to eat it, you burn it. You burn the sacrifice, so the smoke goes up into the sky to reach the invisible god. It's like leaving voicemails on an answering machine for someone who changed their phone number 2,000 years ago. You just keep leaving the messages because your grandfather did it, and it's tradition. You've forgotten why the ritual started.
That is a perfect analogy. And the systems of societal control evolved right alongside the worship. The Anunnaki needed their workforce to remain obedient, even when they weren't directly watching. So the Sumerians developed a concept of the afterlife designed specifically to enforce compliance.
The carrot and the stick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you didn't serve the gods properly, if you were disobedient, you were sent to Arulu, a torturous, painful, dark underworld. But if you were perfectly obedient and served your masters well, your soul went to Dilmun, a paradise of abundance, clean water, and fertile land.
Which is the exact, undeniable blueprint for the modern concepts of hell and heaven. The entire theological system is built on a very simple transaction. Obey and be eternally rewarded, disobey and suffer eternal torment. It's a flawless behavioral control mechanism.
This brings us to a profound piece of psychological speculation from the transcript regarding the very nature of the God figure depicted in the Abrahamic texts. If you read the Old Testament objectively, God often appears wildly contradictory in his behavior.
Yeah, people point that out a lot.
Right. In one chapter, he is infinitely merciful, loving, and patient. In the very next chapter, he is unspeakably wrathful, ordering the destruction of entire populations or annihilating cities like Sodom and Gomorrah with fire from the sky simply for disobedience.
And the transcript suggests a fascinating reason for this. It suggests that this bipolar nature of God might actually be the result of later cultures taking the distinct opposing personalities of the Anunnaki leadership and aggressively merging them into a single monotheistic deity. You take Enlil, the strict, ruthless, rule-obsessed executive who wanted to drown everyone and demanded absolute subjugation, and you mash him together with Enki, the empathetic, creative scientist who loved humanity, warned them of the flood, and wanted them to thrive. If you squash those two distinct guys into one god, you get a deity whose personality swings wildly from terrifying wrath to infinite mercy.
It's an incredibly compelling way to read the textual contradictions of ancient scripture. It resolves the psychological dissonance of a deity who is simultaneously a loving father and a ruthless destroyer. But the implications of this ancient Mesopotamian system don't stop at spirituality and religion.
No, they don't.
This demand for absolute obedience, this deeply ingrained structure of divine lords and subservient humans, laid the exact groundwork for the secular human political systems that persist to this very day.
Which brings us to the ultimate legacy of control, the transition from divine rulers to human kings, the obsession with blue bloods, and the illusion of free will. Let's look at another archaeological bombshell. Between 1908 and 1934, excavators uncovered various prisms and clay tablet that together form what is known as the Sumerian King List.
And the King List is a remarkable document. It details the chronological succession of kings who ruled the various Sumerian city-states, but the lifespans and the reigns of the earliest kings, the ones who supposedly ruled before the Great Flood, are impossibly absurdly long.
Oh yeah, they're crazy long.
For instance, it lists a king named Ululim, who many scholars equate with Adaba, the first engineered human, and states that he ruled the city of Eridu for 28,800 years.
28,800 years for a single ruler. And he's not the only one. The list details several antediluvian kings ruling for tens of thousands of years each. When you add it all up, the timeline of this early rulership stretches back nearly 250,000 years before the flood occurs.
Which, significantly, eerily aligns with modern paleoanthropology's timeline for the biological origins of anatomically modern Homo sapiens. But the most crucial line in the entire king list is the very first sentence. The text explicitly states, "When kingship descended from heaven."
Kingship descended from heaven. That single phrase birthed arguably the most destructive political concept in human history, the divine right to rule. Because eventually, the Anunnaki stepped back from direct, visible governance. Human proxies stepped up to fill the power vacuum. But to justify their absolute tyrannical power over the peasant class, these human rulers claimed a direct genetic link to the gods who had left. We talked about the Egyptian pharaohs coating themselves in gold. That wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a visual political signal to the masses. I am of divine origin, you are not. Therefore, I own you.
This desperate need to prove a divine genetic link created a massive, enduring fixation on pure bloodlines. This is the origin of the rampant destructive incest we see in ancient monarchy. The royal families believed that mixing their royal blood with common, earthly human blood would dilute the divine genetic essence passed down from the Anunnaki or the Nephilim hybrid.
The transcript notes that in historical symbolism, this divine lineage is referred to as blue blood. Red blood symbolizes the common, earthly, engineered human from the red clay. Blue blood symbolizes the divine, the sky, the Nephilim. And this obsession wasn't just an ancient Egyptian or Sumerian quirk that died out in antiquity.
Not at all. It continued straight into the modern era, dictating global politics for centuries. The transcript points to post-1700 European monarchies as a prime example. If you look at the family tree of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, or the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, or the Habsburgs, it is a completely interwoven, aggressively intermarried web of first and second cousins.
They were just marrying each other over and over.
Yeah, they were still operating on this ancient, ingrained imperative to protect the purity of the ruling lineage, to preserve the blue blood at all costs, even at the cost of severe genetic diseases like hemophilia.
And the message sent to the common people, the red bloods, by these monarchs for thousands of years has been exactly the same as Enlil's original message to early humanity. Obey. Know your place. If you go against the system, if you rebel against the divine lineage, whether it's a Sumerian king or a European czar, you will be crushed. Which brings the transcript to its true philosophical climax. After mapping all this history, it presents a really powerful, challenging argument regarding the nature of free will.
The source argues that for thousands of years, humanity has lived under various systems of subjugation and oppression. And our response, conditioned by millennia, a religious framework, has largely been passive. We suffer, and we wait for a divine savior, a messiah, or a Mahdi to return from the sky, wipe out the wicked, and fix everything for us.
We're just waiting.
But the author of the transcript points out a harsh reality. No one is coming to save us. And perhaps, they suggest, a true, ultimate, loving creator of the universe doesn't micromanage. If we possess actual free will, it means we are entirely responsible for our own outcomes.
It's a deep systemic tragedy when you look at it that way. People have been deeply conditioned by this ancient Anunnaki system of obey and be rewarded, disobey and be destroyed. It has bred a profound psychological passivity across the species. We watch injustice unfold, we watch the oppressor crush the oppressed, we watch the environment degrade, and collectively, we just pray for divine intervention.
We are still the Asmat tribe in Papua New Guinea. We are still building bamboo planes, looking up at the clouds, waiting for the cargo ships to drop salvation from the sky.
This is where the expert in the transcript makes their final synthesis and their ultimate plea to the audience, they say. Use the cognitive capacity you were given. True faith in a higher power, in a prime creator, shouldn't be shattered by discovering the historical, perhaps physical root of a religious text.
If you find out that humanity was biologically engineered by an advanced physical species, it doesn't disprove God. It just means those advanced beings are also part of the created universe. They're just another layer of the cosmos.
Right. If you believe in God, keep believing. But look at the history outside the box. Don't let your face be a tool for your own subjugation.
Exactly. The call to action is to break the ancient programming. We must stop waiting for winged beings or returning planets to save us. We need to unite as a species. We need to advance our own science and technology, and crucially, we need to elect moral leaders based on merit, compassion, and capability, rather than continuing to bow down to oppressive inherited power structures, whether they are monarchies, oligarchies, or theological dictatorship that were quite literally born from ancient blueprints of slavery.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the immense journey we've just been on today. We started by dismantling the 1970s pop culture lens of Eric von Däniken and Zecharia Sitchin, stripping away the sci-fi fan fiction to look at the actual texts. We traveled back to 4500 BC to witness the sudden, inexplicable spark of Sumerian civilization. We explored the deeply unsettling translations detailing physical, flesh and blood rulers, the Anunnaki Anunnaki who required food, beer, and labor.
We examined the first recorded labor strike by the overworked Yigiji, which necessitated the biological engineering of early humanity Adapa as a subservient slave caste to mine resources. We saw how human overpopulation and societal noise led the authoritarian Enlil to attempt a planetary reset via the Great Flood, and how the scientist Enki subverted that order to save a remnant of his creation.
And we traced how the sheer trauma and the absolute technological awe of those events echoed through time, mutating into mythology. We saw how the Anunnaki structures shaped the architecture of our world religions, trinities, the 12 god councils, the creation sequences, the flood narratives, and even the very phonetic evolution of the word we use, pray, like Amen and Allah. And finally, we saw how they shaped our modern political reality, birthing the concept of the divine right to rule, the obsession with blue bloods, and the demand for absolute obedience to authority.
I want you, the listener, to really look around your world today with this new lens. The architecture of our modern society is built entirely on these ancient Mesopotamian foundations. Our conditioned obedience to authority, our perpetual passive search for a political or spiritual savior to fix our systemic problems. The transcript even makes a fascinating final observation. It notes that the very color of modern police lights blue symbolizes that ancient skyborn authority. The lingering shadow of those Mesopotamian kings is cast over almost everything we do and how we organize ourselves.
It really is hidden in plain sight. And I want to leave you with one final original thought experiment to mull over as you go about your... Think about the current trajectory of humans. Right now, we are mapping genomes, we are actively editing DNA with CRISPR, and we are sending probes to the stars. Let's assume humanity manages to avoid growing. Imagine that 1,000 years from now, we travel to a distant, primitive, Earth-like planet, we find a local primate-like species, and let's say we use our advanced genetics to alter that local species just a little bit, giving them the intelligence to help us mine local resources and build the infrastructure for our first colony. We work alongside centuries, and then thousands of years later, our mission is complete, and we pack up our ships and go back. Will that engineered species look up at the sky and build religion around it? Will they burn sacrifice in memory of our faith? Will we, humanity, become the Anunnaki or say tech?